Game code for this review was provided by Square. Final Fantasy VII. Square sat up there denying they were making it for so long no one even knew if it was coming. Then the trailer hit. Then the fans exploded when they said it was in chapters. And then, well, we're here. It's a game from our childhood, and it's easy to argue it comes at a perfect time. It's hard to think of anything being remade with such fanfare from new and old gamers alike. And Final Fantasy VII Remake arrives on April 10th, unless you're in Mad Max Land or one of the other 101 places Square randomly decided to pretend time had leapt forward by 5 days and release it anyway. So that means gamers new and old get to enter a land where big birds, fatter brothers are the mainstay of transportation, where iron breastplates and soiled pairs of capris won't get you kicked off buses, and where the entire world lives by a simple code known as broke. Broke is what you say when your friend falls down but you're too cool to show worry, so you just fist bump and say, broke? Let's see how it did, shall we? As always, if you like the video, subscribe, spread it around. Here's my review for Final Fantasy VII Remake. Graphics are up first. Square starts off burning hot, especially from the start, building on the locations and experiences that we all got to see during the demo. But environmentally, the game has some amazing later locations, like the cramped and completely claustrophobic confines of downtown, each sullied street corner, a place where passerbys are just standing together and talking of the moral bankruptcy and the heights of the darker things that people do in the suburb. It's an example of an incredible level of detail, especially when you realize that the locations of a game 25 years ago are basically on a 2D plane. You have to rework them to utilize the depth and increased interactivity of 3D locations, but it works here. And the first time you walk out into the city, it's like seeing a pop-up book as to what has always been two-dimensional suddenly becomes a place you can explore and interact with. One of the fundamental complaints about the remake is that Midgar is the only location, but that was the original Midgar. This is different. This is fully blown out for you to explore and walk around. I'm not saying it's perfect, but I am saying that we're looking at something that is a different beast here. During battle, the game also looks its best, with a love affair for particle effects as enemies' houses are shooting rockets out of their chimneys at you while you're summoning fire demons to light them up. The game, the character, the enemies, everyone is pretty much in love with lighting and particle systems and shimmery things that explode all around you. It's a bit like Kingdom Hearts in that way, where extra and over the top and flowery don't mean anything like they do in most games. Here, they just mean basic, normal, and let's do even more. And when you mix that magic over the tapestry of the technology and the almost steampunk era that you get going in the game, everything has such a Final Fantasy look to it that you would never recognize it as something else. When it comes to character designs, they're excellent for the main characters, from Tifa to Barrett. They all look good, and the emotion and lip syncing does a spectacular job grounding them in the real, even if they all look a bit surreal. However, many of the side characters, and honestly guys, this is a problem you're going to hear me mention a lot in this game and in this review. Many of them look like that friend you have whose driver's license photo is a fucking reaction picture in a haunted house. It's like someone came along and was checking off details, and when it came to the side characters, they just sort of looked at them and said, good enough, without putting their reading glasses on. On the flip side of this, a kudo to them. They don't have the typical atypical Bethesda world where every single armor-wearing jackass is just standing around or going to an inn or coming from an inn or going to sleep so they can wake up and walk to an inn. In Final Fantasy VII, people are puking in the back alleys. They're crying in the corners. They're hitting on each other. They're arguing, eliciting surprise from their friends for stupid decisions. At night, some may be drunk and on the streets. Some may be far less busy at night than others. While this isn't ignoring the heights that other games have handled NPC interactions with since this original game came out, but even looking at current ones, it is, more importantly, realistic world building, and it pays off. It's a huge step up from many other titles, and it's a boon to the storytelling, especially later on, because that will actually make an impact as you continue to play the game. But my God, where the game has issues is the texture work. It's incredibly noticeable. What characters and weapons and enemies in the game worlds are all defined with ultra detailed elements, down to the mole on the side of a face or someone's arm hair. The rest of the world is seriously lackluster in texturing. Half of Midgar looks like it was designed by someone who got eye dilation drops before they went to work. From doors to walls to major items you climb on, low detail assets abound, and it is really a shocking mismatch compared to the rest of the game. And more so when we have seen many games of incredible high detail like this that don't have near as many issues. Luckily though, that brings us to performance, of which there is no problem. This is very well done. It's locked at 4K compatible output from a variable resolution. It never seemed to drop any frames at all, and that was even during the amazing parts, like entire buildings coming down around your head while you're lighting someone on fire, and your friend with an ice staff tries to see if freezing an enemy's prostate from the inside will kill him. As you look at it, this is a game that is at least partially known for beauty and the ability to present a fantastical graphical world, and directly in line with those attempts, you do notice a couple misses. Speaking of noticing things, one thing I did notice was some excellent sound. Let's talk about that.
Let's do this.
Surprisingly, while this is all top-notch sound with excellent weapon and summoning and magic soundscapes, what impressed me the most was the ambient elements that play throughout. Now, I can't talk about some of these because they're spoilers, but what I will say is there's one spot where you're crawling through some areas and you can hear people calling out other people's names from very far away, or the sounds of monsters scratching away in tunnels a long way away from you. In actual battle, the sounds are also excellent, even though most of the magical spells in this chapter of Final Fantasy aren't exactly world-shattering. I did find myself adjusting the leveling a bit as well to sort of get the music to not outweigh the voices so much as they do in the prominent moments. And without spoiling anything, a large number of the cool fan callouts that people want in this game are actually here if you keep an open ear. And that brings us to music.
Well, this is Big's place. I guess he hasn't made it home yet.
Guess not.
It does appear to be a bit more sample heavy than I expected, and while a couple pieces are bigger instrumentals, the parts I loved, the most surprising parts, were when it was like the game was friggin' channeling Kenny Loggins' guitar riffs from Highway to the Danger Zone. I literally expected Cloud to turn around and be wearing a pair of aviators and a leather jacket. The mix of more instrument heavy tracks with a surprising breadth to the musical choice was awesome. And that brings us to voice.
Really? Let me see.
Are we seriously doing this here? That's... wow.
You guys are the worst!
Huh? Your ass is fine. Maybe singed, but the only casualty is your underwear.
Still alive and kicking?
Damn right. Lead man sticks around to the credits roll.
So while this is a little bit hit and miss for me, I can't really say it doesn't meet expectations. Some of it's the writing, some of it's the delivery. It's hard to deny that the Final Fantasy games have embraced both frivolity as well as frank seriousness in dangerously close plot corners in the past. And Final Fantasy VII Remake is no different, with dance numbers offset by discussion that hints about sex slaves, drunken homeless people sleeping in their own puke, and then washes it all down with a hand massage. It's back and forth tonally, but that's always the way Final Fantasy games have been, so I expected that. I do like what they sound like. I think everybody does a fairly good job, including the main actor who handles Cloud. There are a couple side NPCs that are hit or miss, but overall, not bad. And that brings us to gameplay and a bit about the story. And what is better than a game that has a main character known as Cloud Strife, literally one of the worst named characters in the game since that abomination in Dark Souls called Ceaseless Discharge. If you don't believe me, go look it up. It's a real name. You jumped into a job with a mysterious group known as Avalanche on a secret, not so secret mission to help them sabotage a reactor under control of Shinra, which is a global corporation with intents on ruling the world. So yeah, it's basically like the starting of a G.I. Joe cartoon. If G.I. Joe was a terrorist group run by an extra from Gears of War, joined by Renaissance Fair fan, comedic relief character 325, sophomore Snake, and a K-pop singer who just got his Revlon hair product sponsorship. Slowly climbing into the tower of the Shinra group, taking out enemies as you prepare to plant a bomb to destroy their reactor, you're introduced to the theme and feel of each of the characters, as well as interactions with how the game world works. And of course, most of those interactions are going to be combat. The basics of the system are not particularly complex, with combos meted out by hitting the square button to attack enemies, holding it for charging attacks, and using the triangle button for modifying those attacks. You can also dodge as well as block. Dodging successfully can net you an opening, sending you sliding around a heavy-hitting enemy or leaping out of the way of a giant robot's area attack, where blocking can be highly useful against characters that attack insanely fast or hit for high amounts of damage. But the core really here is the character's basic attacks mixed with well-timed modifiers. For instance, Cloud can switch up his entire fighting stance to hit harder. This is known as the Punisher stance when you hit the triangle button. This makes a successful block send back a quick counter strike into enemies, but you're also much slower when moving around, and that directly affects Cloud's ability to flick in and out of combat situations on the battleground, which can actually matter. However, when you have Barrett, the arm cannon wielding leader of the group, you can speed charge your gun more quickly as he preps to launch a devastating series of power attacks once it has done so, versus letting it slowly build up by just attacking normally. On the other end of the spectrum, you have Tifa. She's one of the more engaging characters. We have to combo her ability to increase her ki, which then lets her add moves to her combos when she hits that triangle button. Don't think for a moment this is incredibly complex. It's not, but it does allow for a bit more engagement than what might appear from the start. In addition to all these, you have the weapon special moves. These are directly connected to the weapons themselves. For instance, one Sword of Clouds may allow for you to silky smooth leap into a dash and slash 3 enemies in quick succession, while another may have you spinning a full 780, then leap into the air with an overhead smash. As you fight with the weapons, you also grow more accustomed to those special moves. There's also some hidden, or well, not so hidden weapons in the game as well that you sort of have to look out for. Now, combat itself is a mix of dodging, attacking when the opening is right, and defending when you can't, and make your way in when you can. Staggering enemies when their stagger meter gets full opens them up to much more damage than usual. This, plus judicious use of the ability to target individual enemy parts and experimenting with elemental attacks to define weaknesses in enemies, can be the difference between a game over screen and just watching some robot prance around like that knight in Monty Python on the Holy Grail while he tries to hurt you with no arms. And there's a bit of a trinity here with the combat, because hitting, countering, and blocking all builds up your ATB meter, which allows for you to take all secondary actions in combat, such as using items like grenades or healing bombs, or the more powerful skills you've unlocked for your weapon that I spoke about before. On the other end of that spectrum, taking damage or staggering opponents builds your limit break attacks. These, of course, are huge power moves for every character. Almost everything in combat builds towards something else here when it comes to attacking, and the push and pull of knowing when to pull something off and when to just move out of the way is of excellent use, especially when you're playing on the normal difficulty. Easy and story mode, not so much, because on those modes, damn son. This thing is a walk in the park. This is a walk in the park if someone else was going for the walk and somehow you were the one burning the calories. Be prepared for a dramatic decrease in difficulty if you drop from normal to easy, and a huge one if you drop to story, where characters are just attacking and defending their own and leaving you just to choose when the special skills or particular weapon attacks are going to happen. On the other hand, that doesn't always work, and I'll explain that in a second. Now, many of these weapons not only have their own stats for defense, offense, and magic bonuses, but have slots for materia. This system is just like the original. They're jewels collected in the game that can be socketed into weapons where they add commensurate spells or abilities during battle. Throw an ice one into a sword and you can now cast ice spells, and as you do so, you gain experience with that materia itself, raising the level of the spell that you can cast. Much of the game is about balancing these things and deciding what's important for one particular character, because there are many different combinations you can use. They run from assess the enemies to find weaknesses, elemental attacks like fire and ice and lightning and wind, still more that allow for you to cast barriers around yourself or give you a boost to your starting ATP gauge prior to the start of a battle. There's a huge number of these, and each item that you can have can, of course, only carry an allotted amount of the materia. Luckily, for some, this can be increased, especially weapons. When you go into battle, you gain more and more proficiency with a weapon, and you get skill points when you go up a level. Each weapon has an upgrade screen where you buy skills related to the core of that weapon, and as you go up, more cores are then unlocked, each with more skills. You can also have the game auto-set these if you don't want to take your time, choosing between a balanced weapon, an attacking weapon, or a defending weapon. Of course, there are summons in the game, given in the form of materia as well. Summons can be brought in during particular battles and then given orders on what to do during the battle, and they will also attack on their own. But the best part of these guys is when they leave, they're like a really bad party guest. They just wreck everybody's shit with one huge attack that is a level-filling chaotic blast of energy that is usually the last thing a lot of those enemies are ever going to see. Now, this all sounds great, and much of it is. That is until you start realizing that a lot of the game is built on weird caveats. The summons can only be used in some battles, or the fact that somehow no one realized that a game with a ton of flying enemies might need a fucking jump button. And yes, it is true. If you run up and underneath an enemy and hit attack, your character is going to try to leap up into the air, and if the enemy hasn't moved at all, you will hit them. But that doesn't mean that they're not going to have moved, or flown to the left, or the right, or backwards, resulting in you swinging into the open air like a damned 4-H baseball player. It stuns me that with all the adjustments and even some quality of life improvements, no one at the developer apparently has kneecaps, because no one thought that they should be able to jump. But there are some major improvements we do see here. For example, while traveling around the city, you can take on different jobs for characters that need help, many of them with some excellent item or skill power-ups for their completion. Be aware that furthering the main mission will end that set of smaller missions. There are a large number of them, though. Some are excellent and further detail the story. There is one that is amazing as it introduces some characters you'll basically meet time and time again. I really loved that feeling of connectedness. Additionally, there's really only one collection quest that I did. I didn't do every single quest, but I did a lot of them. And I only bring that up because the human brain has like 86 billion neurons, and I'm pretty sure we all lost half of them arguing over if this is a good game or a crappy game already because it was just a chapter and not the full thing. I want to say this. I played this title on normal. The game took about 37 hours. I played plenty of the side quests, not all of them. I listened to the cutscenes. I explored many locations, maybe once or twice sometimes to find a special item, sometimes just the single time. Its ending area did feel a little spread thin, could probably be curbed by maybe 2 hours. However, while I was having issue with the game on some fronts, I would not plant my flag on the length of this game being one of them. And I think that's important. There's a balancing act between a fine remake and the ultimate betrayal of years of fan loyalty. It's an ethereal line between sort of dogmatic expectations of the past with the current examples of improvements and progressions in the modern. I do feel like they went out and tried a bunch of things. They didn't hit them all, but they hit a lot of them, and they did bring this into the future. Well, maybe a little kicking and screaming. And speaking of kicking and screaming, nothing is more fun than that, so let's talk about fun factor. Final Fantasy VII Remake did not arrive without its issues and controversial change-ups. I'm good with a number of those change-ups. It's nice to be surprised, like when you realize boats are reverse bathtubs. But you always run that risk of alienating the people you're trying to digitally reminisce with. I dug the stories. I dug the characters. It's all Square. It's all Final Fantasy. It's a little bit goofy, but a lot serious, and I enjoyed that. Here's the crux, too. Deep in there, a story actually begins to be told, something that, dare I say, I like the idea of, and I like that it has more time to percolate. The slow switches and character motivations, the way it all comes together. There is no better proven moment than something that happens at the end of the game that solidly, by the way, is not the ending, but instead makes you realize that, oh, this isn't actually going exactly the way I think it is, and then you're able to track that narrative all the way back to the thread that began in the first hour. I think it's done fairly well. So as you guys know, I rate games on a buy, wait for sale, rent, or never touch it again rating system. This one has been a difficult game to review. There's a masterclass people expect from Square games, and I don't know if this hits it. But I do know that I enjoyed what I played and don't feel ripped off for buying a copy to give away to one of you guys. So to me, I would say it is worth getting if you understand these caveats that are here. If you don't like some of these caveats, I would say there's no reason in pushing back and maybe waiting for a bit. So anyway, that's it for me. I hope you guys liked the review. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down. Check out Reddit and Twitter and Facebook. And lastly, you can become a patron of mine, where you jump in there. We do server games. We do all kinds of stuff. We're doing D&D now. There's just all kinds of weird stuff that goes on the Patreon. It's a very cool place. I would love to have you in there, and it helps me give you guys reviews where I buy a copy of every single game, even if the dev gives me a code. Peace out, and enjoy the rest of your week.